Tourists gather, cameras raised, eyes dazzled by the Renaissance pageantry. There they stand, men in striped uniforms of blue, red, and yellow, halberds upright, faces solemn beneath the Roman sun. To the visitor, they are a spectacle, a living painting, frozen in time. A reminder of another age, when loyalty was carved into stone and battlefields were awash with blood. Yet, behind the colors, behind the stillness, lies something else. Something unsaid. They are called the Swiss Guard. Officially, they are nothing more than the Pope's bodyguards. A ceremonial force steeped in tradition, a curious echo of the Middle Ages. That is the story told, the story photographed, the story repeated. But a story is never the whole truth. Look closer. Notice the silence, the way their eyes never wander, the way their hands rest not just on halberds, but on the idea of something unseen. Their presence is both too theatrical and too deliberate, like masks concealing something more dangerous. And so the question emerges, sharp and insistent. Are they ornaments for tourists? Or the deadliest army no one knows? Because the Vatican is not an ordinary place. It is the smallest state in the world. Yet its shadow stretches across centuries, across continents, across wars and kingdoms. Inside its walls live secrets older than nations, older than empires. And secrets demand guardians. Not guards who smile for postcards, but warriors who vanish into silence. One night in 1998, silence was broken. 3 bodies were found in the barracks of the Swiss Guard. The new commander, Alois Estermann. His wife collapsed beside him. And a young soldier named Cedric Tournay. Within hours, the Vatican declared, murder-suicide. The case closed before it even opened. Files sealed, questions buried, speculation smothered. But the air never cleared. Whispers grew louder. Was it rage? Was it betrayal? Or was it something far deeper, something that touched the hidden machinery of the Vatican itself? The uniforms still gleamed the next morning. Tourists still snapped photographs. But for those who understood, the facade cracked. The Estermann affair revealed not just human tragedy, but the possibility of another truth. That behind the painted stripes stands an army of silence, loyal not merely to a man in white, but to a vault of secrets humanity may never be allowed to see. The irony is sharp. The world sees color, but beneath it lies shadow. The halberd glitters in sunlight, but hidden hands clutch firearms, encrypted codes, keys heavy with centuries. A paradox dressed as a parade. Not with noise, but with stillness. Not with open war, but with quiet dominance. They call themselves protectors of the Pope. But perhaps protection is too small a word. Perhaps they are custodians of the unspoken. The Estermann bodies, the sealed corridors, the whispers of archives and prophecy, all point to the same riddle. That the Swiss Guard is not just about loyalty. It is about control. Control of access. Control of truth. Imagine it. A fortress where faith meets power, where documents are hidden away, where relics are locked behind iron doors. Who watches those doors? Who decides which truths remain untold? The Swiss Guard stands at thresholds invisible to the public. At times, they are more than soldiers. They are symbols of obedience and perhaps of conspiracy. So when you stand before them, as tourists do every day, what do you see? Bright cloth and Renaissance flourish? Or a living wall of flesh designed not to impress, but to obscure? What if the very act of spectacle is part of the disguise? A theater hiding the actors who move behind the curtain? And then comes the darker thought. What if this army, loyal to no nation but only to the Pope, not just protecting a person, but protecting something larger, something stranger, a truth too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Because in the Vatican, silence is power. Silence can erase betrayals. Silence can bury murders. Silence can turn men into myths. And the Swiss Guard is silence made flesh. They do not speak. They do not explain. They only stand, watching, waiting. Tourists pass by, believing they have seen everything. But the real story lingers in the shadows of the barracks, in the sealed files of 1998, in the tunnels beneath St. Peter's. The story begins not with color, but with blood. And it is that blood, spilled centuries ago, that still whispers behind the parade. The year is 1506. Rome trembles beneath the weight of politics, betrayal, and shifting alliances. Italy is not yet a nation. It is a fractured mosaic of city-states, duchies, and rival families, each clawing at power, each weaving plots. Armies marched not only across battlefields, but also through palaces, hidden inside whispers, disguised as friends. For a pope to survive in such a world, trust is scarce. Every ally may be a dagger in disguise. Julius II, the warrior pope, understands this better than anyone. He knows Italy too well. Its mercenaries are unreliable, its noble houses treacherous, its loyalties bought and sold like coins in a market. If he is to hold not only Rome, but Christendom itself, he must build a shield that no faction can corrupt. He needs men loyal not to Florence or Milan, not to Venice or Naples, but to him and him alone. His eyes turn north, beyond the Alps, where mountains breed men of steel. Switzerland, rugged, cold, unforgiving. A land of farmers and warriors, bound by discipline, shaped by hardship. For decades, Swiss soldiers had earned a reputation across Europe, unyielding in battle, incorruptible in loyalty. Kings hired them, princes trusted them, armies feared them. Their discipline was not mere legend, it was bone deep. And Julius II, calculating and ruthless, sees in them an answer. So he makes a gamble. He sends word to the cantons of Switzerland, calling for soldiers to serve not a city, not a duke, but the Pope himself. 150 men march south, their boots crunching snow, their halberds gleaming. Across treacherous passes, through bitter winds, they descend from the Alps into Italy. Strangers in a foreign land, their destination is not just a battlefield, it is the heart of Christendom, the Vatican itself. On January 22nd, 1506, they arrive at the gates of Rome. 150 Swiss soldiers, weary but resolute, stand before Julius II. The Pope greets them not as mercenaries, but as chosen guardians. His gamble has become reality. In that moment, the Vatican gains not just an army, but a myth in the making. For what could be more brilliant than choosing foreigners? Men without Italian ties, without local debts or hidden loyalties. They are outsiders, untainted by the intrigues that suffocate Rome. Their only bond is to the Pope, their only allegiance sealed by oath. By bringing them in, Julius II does more than recruit soldiers. He invents a force beyond politics. And yet, behind the official story of protection lies another layer. The Vatican, even then, was not merely a palace of prayer. It was a place where crowns and kings bent knee, where messages passed in code, where secrets demanded guardianship. Were these men brought only to defend against assassins, or to guard something deeper? To keep watch not only over the Pope's life, but over knowledge too dangerous to be left exposed? The gamble works. The Swiss prove their loyalty time and again, a wall of flesh against enemies visible and unseen. They earn their place not only through courage, but through silence. do not speak of what they see. They do not share the whispers overheard in papal chambers. They are strangers in Rome, and that strangeness makes them incorruptible. It is easy to see the wisdom. In an Italy drowning in betrayal, Julius II found men who could not be bought. But wisdom can also be dangerous, because once you build a wall strong enough to keep enemies out, it can also keep truths in. And so the story of the Swiss Guard begins not as ceremony, not as theater, but as strategy. A pope's gamble, forged from fear and ambition, becomes the seed of something greater. An army not of a nation, but of silence. The question lingers. Did Julius II see only soldiers before him? Or did he sense what they would become? Did he know he was not just creating a guard, but building the foundations of a hidden order? One that would outlast wars, empires, and centuries? That day in 1506, 150 men crossed the gates of Rome. But perhaps something else crossed with them. Not just steel and loyalty, but the beginning of a shadow. A shadow that even now, 500 years later, still stretches across the Vatican walls. The city screams. Rome, the eternal city, is torn open by fire and steel. It is May 6th, 1527, the day history brands into the flesh of the Swiss Guard. Tens of thousands of imperial soldiers flood the streets. Mercenaries who care little for sanctity, who hunger for gold, blood, and vengeance. They are the army of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. But in their eyes, Rome is not holy. It is prey. The Pope flees. Clement VII, panicked, rushes toward the hidden passage, the Passetto di Borgo, that snake of stone leading from the Vatican to the fortress of Castel Sant'Angelo. But he does not run alone. Around him, a ring of men closes ranks. 189 Swiss guards stand between the Pope and annihilation. They know the odds. Tens of thousands against fewer than 200. They know they will not survive. And yet they do not retreat. They do not scatter. They form a wall of flesh, halberds braced, eyes fixed. Their oath was sworn not with ink, but with blood. And now that blood is demanded. The clash is brutal. Halberds break, swords shatter, bodies collapse one upon another. The guard fights in silence, a silence thicker than the roar of the invading army. Step by step, they are driven back, but step by step they buy time. Every second bleeds into eternity, every strike carved into legend. 147 fall, cut down in the courtyards, the stairways, the very stones of St. Peter's. Their blood flows not as defeat, but as foundation. For in their sacrifice, the Pope survives. Clement VII reaches Castel Sant'Angelo, pulled through the hidden passage, shielded by the last living guards who drag him to safety. Rome is lost, but the papacy endures. And so, the Swiss Guard is baptized, not by ceremony, but by massacre, not by pageantry, but by martyrdom. The 1527 sack of Rome becomes their genesis, their crucible of fire. From that day forward, they are not merely soldiers. They are legend. Every May 6th, new recruits gather in the Vatican courtyard. Before the Pope, before the world, they raise 3 fingers, the Trinity, and swear the oath of loyalty. It is no accident that this day is chosen. Each oath is not only a vow of service, but a memorial. Each young guard steps into the blood of those who died in 1527, binding himself to a chain of sacrifice stretching across centuries. The Vatican tells this story often. Tourists hear it, pilgrims whisper it, guides repeat it. But perhaps the story is told not simply to remember, but to remind to remind that behind the colors and the rituals stands an army forged in death. That their loyalty is not symbolic, it is absolute. That silence is not just discipline, it is survival. And here the question lingers, sharper than ever. If their visible duty is to guard the Pope, what invisible duty did they also inherit that day? To protect not only a man, but an institution, a secret, a continuity of power that must never be broken? The legend of 1527 is more than history. It is myth. Myths have power. Myths silence doubt. Myths hide truth beneath story. For the Swiss Guard, their blood became more than sacrifice. It became a shield. A shield not just for the Pope, but for whatever the Vatican decides must remain untouchable. And in that silence, in that blood, a new identity was born. From that day, the Guard was no longer merely soldiers from the Alps. They became something else. Something Rome had never seen before. A brotherhood whose loyalty was stronger than death, whose obedience was as unyielding as stone, and whose secrets, once learned, would never escape their lips. The city burned, the streets bled, the Pope survived, and the Swiss Guard, though nearly annihilated, rose again, reborn in the firestorm of betrayal and sacrifice. To this day, the Vatican claims them as heroes of faith. But in the shadows, one must wonder, what else was baptized in that blood? They stand in the courtyard, sunlight rippling across their uniforms like fire caught in fabric. Red, blue, yellow. Bold stripes stitched into patterns that seem almost theatrical. To the eye of the tourist, they are costumes. To the Vatican, they are symbols. But symbols are never simple. They are languages, coded in cloth, whispering meanings to those who know how to listen. Officially, the explanation is neat. Red for the blood of Christ and for sacrifice. Blue for faith and loyalty. Yellow or gold for the papal power that glitters above all. A trinity of colors reflecting faith, service, and authority. Easy enough to repeat, easy enough to believe. But repetition is often camouflage, because in truth, the design carries deeper veins. The Medici family, whose fingerprints lie across Renaissance Rome, claimed the same palette. Gold for wealth, blue for divinity, red for the power of bloodline. Was the uniform chosen to honor a family dynasty? Or was it chosen to embed the Pope's protectors within a fabric of political allegiance? Perhaps both. Then come the whispers of alchemy. Red, the rubido, the final stage of transformation where matter becomes spirit. Blue, the celestial, the infinite. Yellow, the purified gold, perfection achieved. Woven together, the Guard becomes more than flesh and bone. They become alchemical guardians, living sigils of transformation. Men turned into symbols, and symbols turned into silence. And yet, the most haunting interpretation is also the simplest. That the red is not just cloth, but blood. That beneath the silk folds, a reminder lingers of May 6th, 1527, of courtyards slick with sacrifice. That every stripe is a quiet memorial, forcing each soldier to wear the past on his chest. Not one of them marches without carrying the shadow of those who died before him. The uniform becomes a paradox, at once bright, almost festive, and yet dark with memory. A carnival of color, masking an undertone of death. Tourists point, smile, take pictures. Few realize they are photographing shrouds stitched into patterns. Few understand that these colors bleed history. There's also the question of disguise. Could it be that the theatricality is deliberate? A distraction? A way to make the Guards appear ornamental, harmless, even ridiculous to the casual eye. While behind those stripes lie soldiers trained with weapons invisible to the public? If so, the uniform itself becomes a weapon. Theatricality as concealment, brightness as camouflage. Symbols carry power. They are not just decoration, they are command. To wear the Swiss Guard uniform is to wear more than clothing. It is to step into a tradition where every thread is charged with centuries of sacrifice, myth, and secrecy. The cloth is not light, it carries weight. And so, when a young recruit dons the uniform for the first time, he does not merely put on colors, he puts on history. He becomes part of a tapestry woven not in fabric, but in silence and blood. The tourists will never know. They see costumes, they see photographs. But for the Vatican, the uniform is a living reminder, a statement in cloth, loyalty unto death, silence beyond words, protection that stretches not just across the Pope's life, but across time itself. And the question lingers in the mind. What are these colors truly hiding? Are they symbols of faith, of politics, of alchemy, or of something even darker? Stitched into the very identity of the world's most secret army. In the Vatican courtyard, the ceremony unfolds with precision. A line of recruits kneel, their halberds raised, their eyes steady. Before them, a Bible rests open, its pages heavy with centuries. They extend 3 fingers, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and their voices rise together, declaring absolute loyalty, not to a nation, not to a flag, but to one man, the Pope. It is a spectacle for cameras, a moment designed to inspire awe. Each May 6th, the anniversary of the sack of Rome, the ritual repeats. A reminder that their loyalty is not casual, not symbolic. It is blood-bound. They swear to protect the Pope with their lives, to obey even unto death. Tourists applaud. Priests nod with pride. The world sees devotion clothed in ceremony. But is that all? Whispers insist there is another oath, one never spoken in public, one never recorded. A vow not of loyalty, but of silence. A covenant deeper than duty, binding not just action, but memory. The visible oath swears protection. The hidden oath demands secrecy. Consider the strangeness of the Guard. Hundreds have served, thousands across centuries. And yet, how many memoirs exist? How many interviews? How many revelations? How many confessions? Almost none. Their veterans do not speak. Their stories do not leak. Their silences stretch into decades, as if they carry within them not only discipline, but prohibition. As if to leave the Guard is not to be freed from oath, but to be bound even tighter by it. Why? What truths must never be spoken? What corridors must remain uncharted in memory? Could it be that the Guard sees more than the world is allowed to know? That, in the stillness of midnight corridors, in the echoes of papal chambers, in the secret passageways beneath St. Peter's, they witness fragments of power too dangerous for daylight? If so, then the oath of silence is not superstition. It is necessity. It is not about loyalty to one man, but about safeguarding an entire architecture of secrecy. The Swiss Guard does not merely shield the Pope's body, they shield the Vatican's mysteries. The 2 oaths, then, stand in contrast. One in the open, one in the dark. One for the crowd, one for the initiated. Like 2 faces of the same mask. Devotion above, secrecy below. A soldier swears both, whether he admits it or not. And this duality becomes their essence. To the outside world, they are painted men, a ceremonial guard whose duty is colorful and clear. But within the barracks, behind the sealed doors, their silence is as much a weapon as their halberd. What does a soldier feel, kneeling before the Pope, hand on the Bible, voice echoing across the courtyard? Pride? Fear? Or the weight of knowing that the words spoken aloud are only half the story? It is this weight that bends them into something more than soldiers. They become guardians not only of flesh, but of memory. Gatekeepers not only of doors, but of truths. The crowd disperses. The ceremony ends, but the silence lingers. And in that silence, the second oath waits. Unseen, unspoken, and perhaps more binding than the first. The halberd gleams beneath the Roman sun. Long wooden shaft, steel head shaped for both thrust and cut. To the tourists, it is a medieval relic, something closer to theater than to war. They smile at the sight of it, imagining knights and crusades. They believe the guards carry it for tradition, for color, for show, and in part that is true. But the halberd is also a mask. Behind it lies another arsenal, weapons not made for parade, but for silence. Step inside the barracks, and the mood shifts. Here, no tourists are allowed. Here, rifles line the walls. Glocks rest in holsters. Sig Sauers lie on benches, stripped and cleaned with methodical care. Compact submachine guns wait, magazines loaded, silent in the shadows. The halberd may stand in the courtyard, but the reality of battle is prepared within. Training drills are relentless. Close quarters combat, counter-sniper routines, anti-terrorism maneuvers. The guards rehearse scenarios tourists never imagine. Suicide bombers in St. Peter's Square, infiltrators inside the basilica, assassins mingling with the faithful. Their techniques are modern, their weapons efficient, their reflexes sharpened. The transformation began in 1981. A single gunshot shattered the illusion of invulnerability when Pope John Paul II was struck in St. Peter's Square. The world watched as the Pope collapsed in his white robes, blood blooming against purity. That moment changed everything. The Vatican understood. Pageantry was not enough. A halberd could not stop a bullet. Tradition could not block an assassin's aim. And so the guard adapted. Quietly, without announcement, they became something more. They studied counter-terrorism tactics. They trained alongside international security agencies. Their mission expanded not only ceremonial guardianship, but silent prevention. In the eyes of the crowd, nothing changed. But in the shadows, everything did. Imagine the paradox. By day, they march in silk, their halberds glinting. By night, they run drills with pistols and radios, learning how to vanish into the crowd, how to spot danger before it strikes. They are two armies in one body, one visible, one invisible. And the halberd, that ancient spear, becomes more than symbol. It becomes misdirection. While the world stares at steel gleaming in sunlight, they do not see the weapon concealed beneath the tunic. They do not see the soldier ready to draw and fire in a heartbeat. This is the essence of the Swiss Guard: contrast, ritual and reality, color and shadow, ceremony and secrecy. What looks ornamental is lethal. What looks theatrical is tactical. Perhaps that is why the Vatican clings to the halberd, not just for tradition, but for concealment. Because what better way to hide a soldier than to make him appear harmless? What better disguise for a counter-assassin than the image of a ceremonial actor? The tourists never suspect. The pilgrims never imagine. They believe they are watching guardians of a bygone age, frozen in time. They do not realize that beneath the stripes and the halberds beats the heart of a modern force, quiet, armed, and always waiting. And so the paradox deepens. Spears for show, guns for shadows. The bright cloth masks the black steel. The world sees pageantry. The Vatican keeps its warriors unseen. Not every man can step into the striped uniform. The Swiss Guard is not an open army. It is a gate, and that gate admits very few. First, there is the obvious. Every recruit must be Swiss. Not Italian, not European at large, only Swiss. A rule as strict now as it was 5 centuries ago. Why? Because Switzerland, landlocked and neutral, breeds men who are both outsiders and trustworthy. By choosing them, the Vatican ensures loyalty detached from the intrigue of Italian politics, from the turbulence of world powers. Swiss means neutral. Swiss means dependable. But nationality is not enough. The candidate must also be Catholic, not merely in name, but in practice. Mass attendance, baptismal records, priestly endorsements, all scrutinized. Faith is measured as carefully as skill. Because to guard the Pope is not just to guard a man. It is to guard a symbol of faith itself. Then comes character. Investigators dig into family history, not one generation, but many. Rumors whisper of files tracing ancestry back through centuries, searching for stains, criminal ties, political affiliations, even whispers of heresy. To carry the halberd, your bloodline must be clean. The Vatican, in this sense, does not recruit men. It recruits legacies. The physical standards are equally demanding. Height requirements, strength, stamina. The guard may appear ceremonial, but their training is brutal. Each candidate must prove he can endure hours of drill, the strain of armor, the silence of discipline. Not every soldier survives the transition. Many walk away before the oath is sworn. And then, perhaps most striking, the demand for purity. Recruits must be unmarried upon entry, between 19 and 30 years of age. Their loyalty must not be divided between wife and duty, between family and service. Only later, after years of sacrifice, may a guard be permitted to marry, under conditions approved by the Vatican itself. To pass through this gate is to surrender more than freedom. It is to abandon ordinary life. Once chosen, a man belongs no longer to himself, nor to Switzerland, but to the Pope. His world narrows to courtyards and corridors, to rituals and silence. His identity dissolves into uniform. What does it mean to be chosen in this way? Some call it an honor, others a burden. For the Guard is not merely an army, it is an order, a society cloaked in ceremony, wrapped in silence, bound by rules older than the nations around it. And here lies the deeper question. If the Vatican demands such purity, such scrutiny, such control, what are they guarding against? Is it merely loyalty, or is it something more? Do they fear betrayal of the Pope, or betrayal of secrets? To be selected is to step into another world, a world without transparency, without freedom, without voice. A soldier chosen is a man erased, reborn as silence in stripes. It is said among the recruits, to enter the Swiss Guard is to vanish from Switzerland. Your nation forgets you, your past forgets you, and in return, the Vatican claims you, body, mind, and perhaps even soul. The gate is narrow. Few pass through, but those who do become something else entirely. Not mercenaries, not mere soldiers. They become keepers of a covenant older than their own lives. Step inside their world, and the silence grows heavier. The barracks of the Swiss Guard are not grand, not gilded with the opulence of Vatican halls. They are narrow, confined, built for discipline, not luxury. Stone walls press close, corridors echo with footsteps, dormitories lined with modest beds where soldiers rest side by side. Privacy is rare. Individuality fades. Meals are shared at long tables, bread, cheese, wine. The atmosphere resembles a monastery more than a military camp. Prayers begin and end the day. Latin hymns mingle with the clatter of plates. Between drills and duties, the guards kneel in chapels, their uniforms folded aside, their voices low, their faith rehearsed as rigorously as their weapons. They are warriors, yes, but cloistered warriors. There is laughter, of course. Young men joke in the refectory, stories slip between walls. Yet the laughter feels hushed, always shadowed by an awareness. They live inside a cage of ritual. They are not free men in a city. They are residents of a fortress. The rules are exacting. Lights out at set hours. Permission required to leave. Romantic lives monitored. Marriages permitted only under Vatican approval. A soldier's body, faith, and loyalty are inspected as thoroughly as his weapons. Even families who come to visit sense the distance. The guard is home, and yet it is never truly home. And yet, within these stone walls, bonds form stronger than iron. They are brothers in silence. They share not only duty, but confinement. They guard each other's secrets as fiercely as they guard the Pope's. For in this cloistered life, camaraderie is the only oxygen. To live as a guard is to inhabit a paradox. They are young men, full of vigor, yet their days are regimented like monks. They are soldiers trained in modern tactics, yet they eat and pray in spaces that feel centuries old. They are sworn protectors of the Pope, but also prisoners of tradition. Perhaps this is deliberate. By binding them so tightly to ritual, the Vatican shapes them into something other than ordinary soldiers. It makes them instruments. It strips away distraction, leaving only loyalty. And when their service ends, many return to Switzerland, marry, take ordinary jobs. But those who know them say they are never quite the same. Their silence follows them home. They do not tell stories. They do not describe their days. It is as though part of them remains locked behind the barracks gates. Why? Is it discipline? Or is it the weight of secrets they can never share? Perhaps both. So when you picture them standing in sunlight, halberds gleaming, imagine also the nights behind stone walls, the prayers whispered before sleep, the discipline pressed into every gesture, the life not of soldiers alone, but of cloistered warriors, half monk, half shadow. And the silence grows. Beneath the marble courtyards and sunlit piazzas, another Vatican waits, a labyrinth of stone and shadow. Narrow tunnels running beneath basilicas, stairways twisting into silence, hidden doors sealed with locks older than nations. Most pilgrims never see it. Most tourists never imagine it. Yet the Swiss Guard knows it well. They are not merely guardians of gates above, they are key holders below. In their hands jingle keys heavy as anchors, keys that open iron doors few will ever pass. To carry them is to carry centuries. Each lock hides more than a chamber. Each door protects more than a room. The Passetto di Borgo, the secret passage connecting the Apostolic Palace to Castel Sant'Angelo, is the most famous. A stone artery of survival, built for popes to flee when Rome burned. It was through this corridor that Clement VII escaped in 1527, the guard's blood buying his path. But the Passetto is only one among many. Whispers speak of tunnels branching deeper, of staircases leading not to safety, but to secrecy. Some passages end in crypts, where bones lie in silence. Some lead to vaults, where relics are hidden from the world. Others, it is said, wind into chambers where forbidden texts sleep under dust and chains. Documents too dangerous to be read. Books that could fracture faith. Memories too explosive to release. The Swiss Guard does not speak of these places. Yet their role is clear. They are not just warriors, they are gatekeepers. In their duty lies a paradox: to guard the Pope above and to guard the Vatican's underworld below. Imagine the weight of such silence. A young guard, barely 20, holding keys that open doors leading to secrets older than his country. To stand in a stone corridor, torchlight flickering, unlocking a door that creaks with 5 centuries of secrecy. To know that behind it lies not only history, but something unmeant for human eyes. Legends grow in such shadows. Some say there is a passage that reaches the fabled apostolic archives, the so-called Vatican Library, though it is no library at all, but a fortress of sealed knowledge. Others whisper of rooms where treasures taken from fallen empires lie. Crowns of kings, scrolls from lost temples, even relics carried from Jerusalem itself. The guard does not confirm. They do not deny. They simply stand watch. And so the metaphor deepens. They are not only guards of the living, but sentinels of the dead. Not only keepers of the present, but custodians of what must never return. For what would happen if one door opened too far? If one relic was revealed? If one manuscript was read? The silence of the guard suggests the answer would be too heavy for the world to bear. Keys in their hands, locks in their care. Beneath the Vatican lies a world unseen, a world protected not by stone alone, but by silence. And in that silence, the Swiss Guard becomes more than soldiers. They become threshold keepers, standing not only between the Pope and danger, but between humanity and truths buried in the dark. The Vatican is not only stone, not only ritual. It is memory made solid, memory layered into walls, sealed in boxes, locked behind iron doors. And the Swiss Guard stands among these memories. Their presence a reminder that some truths must be protected not from thieves, but from time itself. Consider the Apostolic Archives. Officially, it is a research collection, a library of documents open to scholars under permission. But in truth, it is a fortress of paper. 60 miles of shelving, millions of manuscripts, letters, decrees, correspondence from kings and emperors, agreements that ended wars, that divided nations, that redrew maps, documents that whisper the secret conversations between power and faith. The archives hold letters from Michelangelo to popes, from monarchs begging blessings or forgiveness, from Galileo pleading his case against the church, from emperors demanding crowns and popes granting or denying them. This alone would be treasure enough. But the whispers go further. They say the shelves hide forbidden books, texts banned, burned, but never destroyed, heresies kept not in flames, but in silence, gospels never canonized, prophecies never revealed, histories that would unravel the carefully woven tapestry of tradition. The guard never speaks of these, yet their footsteps echo in the same halls. Their eyes, unblinking, watch the same locked doors. And beyond texts, there are relics, bones of saints wrapped in silk, fragments of the true cross said to be splintered from Golgotha, chalices kissed by centuries, rings worn by popes long buried, objects that draw pilgrims by the millions. And yet, there are whispers of others never shown, artifacts hidden too deeply, too dangerously to be displayed. Who protects them? Who ensures no hand, no eye, no breath disturbs them? The Swiss Guard. It is easy to think of them only as protectors of flesh, the Pope's flesh, the Vatican's stones. But their mission stretches further. They protect memory itself, memory that could ignite wars if revealed, memory that could undo faith if exposed, memory that, once broken free, would scatter like fire across the world. Perhaps this is their truest purpose, not merely guardians of a man, but guardians of continuity. The Vatican survives because it controls memory, And the guard survives because it ensures that control is never broken. Imagine the weight of that. To know that behind the doors you protect lies knowledge the world may never be allowed to see. To know that your silence is the final wall between humanity and truth too dangerous to name. Tourists see them as painted soldiers, but in the shadow of the archives, they are something else entirely. They are the keepers of memory. The living silence that ensures some voices remain forever unheard. And the question grows sharper. If these memories were revealed, what would happen to faith? To nations? To history itself? Perhaps the Swiss Guard does not simply protect. Perhaps they imprison, not people, but truths. There are secrets heavier than gold, heavier than relics, heavier even than the bones of saints. They are words. Words written in trembling hands, words spoken in visions, words believed to come not from man, but from God himself. Prophecies. And in the Vatican, prophecy is guarded with the same silence as archives, the same steel as relics. The most infamous of these whispers is Fatima. In 1917, 3 shepherd children in Portugal claimed visions of the Virgin Mary. They spoke of war, of peace, of trials to come. The first 2 secrets were revealed. The third secret of Fatima, was locked away. For decades, the world speculated. Was it the end of days? The fall of the church? The betrayal of faith itself? In the year 2000, the Vatican unveiled its version. A vision of a bishop dressed in white, shot among corpses, interpreted as the 1981 assassination attempt on John Paul II. But many doubted. The language of the vision was too broad, too haunting, too incomplete. Scholars, priests, and even some bishops whispered, was this truly the whole secret? Or was part withheld? If withheld, where does it rest? In a vault? In a box? Guarded not by archivists, but by soldiers sworn to silence? The Swiss Guard, silent in their barracks, may know more than any scholar ever will. And Fatima is not alone. Whispers tell of other prophecies locked in Vatican drawers, warnings of schism, predictions of fire falling from the sky, notes scribbled by saints who claimed visions of future popes, of wars yet unimagined, of betrayals within the church itself. Documents too dangerous for the faithful to read. For once known, they could fracture the very unity they were meant to protect. The Guard stands at the edge of these prophecies. They do not interpret, they do not question. They simply protect. Theirs is not the duty of understanding, but of silence. They are like monks with swords, bound not to reveal, but to guard the boundary between knowledge and oblivion. And perhaps this is the deeper paradox. A soldier expects to face visible enemies, assassins, armies, bombs. But the Swiss Guard also stands against the invisible, against words that could ignite nations, against prophecies that could unravel faith. Their halberds and rifles protect not just the Pope's life, but the world's future. Because what if the prophecy says more than we are told? What if it predicts not just one Pope's suffering, but the downfall of the Church itself? What if it describes betrayal at the highest throne or a war that ends civilization? If such words exist, they cannot be released. They must be kept, hidden, locked in silence. And who else but the Swiss Guard, the sworn custodians of secrecy, could be trusted with such a burden? To the public, they are bright colors in sunlight. To the Vatican, they are sentinels at the edge of prophecy. Soldiers standing not just at doors of stone, but at thresholds of time itself. The night is May 4th, 1998. Inside the Vatican walls, silence reigns, broken only by footsteps echoing across the barracks. By morning, Silence turns to shock. 3 bodies are discovered. The new commander of the Swiss Guard, Alois Estermann, his wife, Gladys Meza Romero, and a young vice corporal, Cedric Tournay. The Vatican moves quickly, too quickly. Within hours, the official statement is released. A tragedy of passion and rage. Tournay, described as unstable, killed Estermann and his wife before turning the gun on himself. Murder-suicide. Case closed, files sealed, questions buried. But silence does not smother whispers. It only feeds them. Why that night? Estermann had just been appointed commander, his career reaching its peak. Why would a soldier under his command suddenly snap? Tournay's family later claimed he had been treated unfairly, denied promotion, humiliated. Was resentment enough to spark such violence? Or was resentment only a mask for something else? Forensic anomalies emerged. The bullet wound in Tournay's head was inconsistent with suicide, experts claimed. A note left behind was suspicious, its language unlike his own. The Vatican dismissed such doubts. Yet rumors grew that Estermann was tied to secret networks, to corruption, even to intelligence services. That Tournay had stumbled upon something larger than his life. That the truth, once glimpsed, could not be allowed to spread. Some whispered of a cover-up, that Estermann knew too much, that his sudden rise had placed him in a position of dangerous knowledge. About Vatican finances, about alliances, about shadow orders that moved beneath the marble halls. Others suggested he himself was complicit, silenced before he could act. And his wife, was she collateral? Or was she also part of a secret too fragile to escape the walls? The Vatican never allowed a full investigation. The files remained sealed, the case closed in official record. But among guards, among those who served before and after, unease lingers. They know the barracks are not just dormitories. They are cages of silence. And sometimes, silence kills. To this day, the Estermann affair is remembered as a crack in the painted mask. Proof that beneath the uniforms and oaths, beneath the pageantry and ritual, lies something raw. The Swiss Guard, the most loyal of armies, is also human, vulnerable, and perhaps entangled in webs the public will never see. 3 corpses in one night. A commander, his wife, his soldier. The Vatican calls it tragedy. History calls it mystery. And the silence around it, the silence so heavy it still suffocates questions, calls it something darker. For if loyalty is absolute, why do betrayals happen? And if the guard is incorruptible, why must records be sealed? Perhaps the Estermann night was not an accident, not a private feud, but a glimpse into the other face of the guard. The face not of protection, but of conspiracy. The halberds gleamed the next morning as if nothing had happened. Tourists smiled. Photographs were taken. But for those who knew, for those who saw, the courtyard no longer looked the same. The colors still shone, but in the shadows, blood had already stained the silence. History is written with ink, but also erased with silence. For centuries, the Vatican has told a single story of the Swiss Guard. Loyalty without flaw, sacrifice without hesitation, devotion without question. An army incorruptible, a legend unbroken. But legends are never that pure. Whispers linger of betrayals, stories of guards who sold secrets, who opened gates, who sided with enemies. The records of such men are sparse, their names erased as though they never lived. It is as if the Vatican itself reached into the past and cut them out of memory. The bright tapestry of loyalty is stitched together not with facts, but with careful omissions. Consider the wars of the 16th and 17th centuries. Alliances shifted like tides. Popes rose and fell. Enemies circled Rome like wolves. Could it truly be that every guard remained pure, every soldier unbreakable? Or is it more likely that some faltered, some broke, some whispered to the wrong ears in the wrong dark? And when they did, their stories were buried. Families in Switzerland sometimes spoke of it, of sons who returned suddenly, discharged without honor, without explanation, of names that could no longer be spoken, of men who, once guards, were suddenly not guards at all, as if they had never passed the oath, never held the halberd. The Vatican offered no answers. Silence was the only reply. This is how power preserves itself, by pruning memory, by shaping history not through what is told, but through what is hidden. The Swiss Guard becomes legend because its fractures are erased. The myth of perfect loyalty survives because imperfection is buried. And yet, the silence itself betrays the truth. For why erase if there is nothing to erase? Why strike out names if there are no names to fear? The very absence of records becomes proof that betrayal exists, proof that beneath the mask of unbroken loyalty lies the same frailty that haunts all men. But the Vatican cannot afford frailty. The Guard must remain untouchable, because they guard not only the Pope's body, but the image of papal power. And so, history is edited. The faithful see martyrs, heroes, saints in uniform. They do not see those who faltered, because faltering has been erased. Imagine the terror of such erasure. To serve with loyalty, yet know that should you fail, should you hesitate, should you doubt, you would not merely be punished. You would be forgotten. Your name struck out, your memory swallowed. Silence sharper than any blade. The Swiss Guard presents itself as eternal, flawless. But every flawless stone has cracks. And sometimes, the cracks are not mended. They are buried. Buried so deeply that even historians stumble over blank spaces where names should be. In the end, this is the paradox. Their loyalty is remembered because disloyalty is forgotten. Their history shines because shadows are cut away. And the Guard becomes not an army of men, but an army of silence. Silence that can preserve, but also erase. So when you hear of their unbroken faith, ask yourself, is it truth, or is it memory carefully rewritten? Perhaps the greatest weapon the Vatican wields is not steel or prayer, but the eraser of history. The Vatican is tiny, a city no larger than a neighborhood. Yet whispers insist the Swiss Guard's reach extends far beyond its marble borders. Officially, they never leave. They are bound to the Pope, to the walls of St. Peter's, to ceremonies and courtyards. But rumors, persistent and insistent, tell another story. Some say that during the Second World War, Swiss Guards slipped quietly beyond Rome. Disguised, ununiformed, they escorted relics, manuscripts, even people to safety. When bombs fell and Nazis prowled, the Vatican was neutral. But neutrality does not mean inaction. Was it truly only priests and diplomats who safeguarded treasures from destruction? Or were there soldiers, silent and unseen, carrying burdens through the night? Others whisper of the Cold War, that in the age of spies and shadows, the Guard trained alongside intelligence services. Not officially, never on paper, but in practice, learning codes, counter-surveillance, the art of disappearing. The Vatican had interests too delicate to entrust to outsiders. Who better to trust than men already bound by an oath stronger than law? And in more recent decades, the whispers continue. That guards, long after leaving the service, reappear in conflicts where religion and politics intertwine. In Lebanon, in South America, in Eastern Europe, not in uniform, never acknowledged, but always present when sacred treasures or papal envoys were at risk. To the public, they were nameless bodyguards. To those who knew, they were remnants of the Guard, the Vatican's quiet extensions into the world. It is impossible to prove. No records exist, no medals are displayed. But perhaps that is the point. If their work is silence, then their absence from history is proof, not denial. Imagine them. A man in plain clothes, anonymous in a crowd, eyes scanning, movements precise. He does not announce his mission. He does not admit who he serves. But his silence is louder than allegiance. And when the task is done, an artifact escorted, a priest shielded, a secret preserved, he disappears, leaving no trace. This is the paradox of the Swiss Guard. They are both confined and unbound, both prisoners of the Vatican walls and shadows cast across the world. An army too small to fight battles, yet perhaps large enough to alter history in ways never recorded. Are they simply protectors of a man in white? Or are they agents of a silence that stretches across borders, across wars, across centuries? The world may never know. But every rumor, every whisper, every shadow suggests the same unsettling possibility, that the halberds and uniforms are only one face of the Guard. The other face walks among us, unseen. And perhaps, right now, somewhere in the world, a former Swiss Guard sits quietly, still bound by an oath of silence, still watching, still guarding. The paradox of the Swiss Guard lingers like incense in a darkened chapel. On the surface, they are a handful of men in colorful uniforms, their halberds gleaming for tourists' cameras. But behind that painted facade lies something older, stranger, heavier. An army both small and infinite. For more than 5 centuries, they have stood at the Pope's side. They have bled in courtyards, died on staircases, vanished into tunnels beneath Rome. They have sworn oaths in daylight and in shadow, their voices rising for the world and falling into silence for themselves. They have carried halberds for show, rifles for shadows, keys to doors that open not to rooms, but to centuries. They have guarded memory, prophecy, relics, archives, and perhaps they have guarded something else, truths that could change the course of history if ever revealed. This is the paradox. They protect by concealing, they preserve by erasing. They are shields, but also locks, not only defending the Pope from assassins, but defending humanity from truths too dangerous to touch. The Estermann affair, 3 corpses in the barracks, still echoes like a crack in marble. It proved that even silence bleeds, that even within loyalty fractures exist. Yet the Vatican closed the wound, sealed the files, buried the questions. The mask was repaired, the story rewritten, the Guard presented once more as unbroken. And perhaps that is their truest function, not to prevent cracks, but to ensure the world never sees them. Are they a loyal shield? Yes. Are they also something more? A gate between humanity and secrets it must never know? Perhaps. The uniforms tell one story, the shadows tell another. The truth lies in between, suspended in silence. Silence. That is their greatest weapon. Not the halberd, not the pistol, not the drills in hidden barracks. Silence is what keeps betrayals forgotten, files sealed, prophecies hidden, archives guarded. Silence is what makes them more than soldiers, what makes them myths. And myths endure because they are never fully explained. So the next time you see them, standing motionless in their carnival of colors, ask yourself, are they guardians of a man in white, or guardians of truths humanity will never touch? Are they shields against assassins, or sentinels at the threshold of history itself? The answer never comes. Because the Swiss guard does not speak. They only stand, they only watch, they only guard. And perhaps that is the truest mystery of all. The greatest secrets are not lost. They are kept in silence, kept behind stone, kept by the men in red, blue, and gold, an army both seen and unseen. And in their silence, the world is guarded still. The story drifts now, like the hush of evening bells over St. Peter's Square. The tourists have gone, the cameras packed away. In the courtyard, shadows lengthen, and the guards remain. Still, watchful, silent. Theirs is a presence so steady it almost vanishes. Yet within that stillness lies centuries of blood and fire. The memory of 1527, when nearly all of them died to shield a fleeing pope. The echo of oaths sworn under torchlight, vows binding them not just to service, but to silence. The weight of keys that open doors to worlds most will never see. They are an army of contradiction, a pageant for the eye and a riddle for the mind, a shield for the Pope, and perhaps a gatekeeper of secrets too vast for ordinary men. And so we end where we began, with a question. Are they simply the painted soldiers of the Vatican, ornaments in silk and steel? Or are they the hidden warriors of history, guardians not only of flesh, but of truth itself? The answer will not be given. It will not be written. It will remain behind stone, behind silence, behind the faces of men who do not speak. Because silence is the Vatican's strongest weapon, and silence is the Guard's truest legacy. The bells fade, the colors dissolve into shadow. The city sleeps, and the Swiss Guard, unseen, unyielding, remains, watching, waiting, guarding.